Yep.
Okay.
17.
D-Height, you want to be on emails?
Sure. JS, can you get it done?
So will it be on emails or no?
Sure.
Wasn't very confident.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. I didn't do the wheel. They're in the wheels. Wheel.
That's not a reassuring.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
I don't want to get up in your business right here, but would you mind my cousin?
Oh, no problem. No problem.
Mooch, I appreciate it. I can also do what's your turn.
I mean, for the format of the records, it looked like that was back by
There's one.
Does your also just not know that part?
Probably.
No,
Like the desk with a little reclining thing. Okay, so Ricardo, that is the camera and that is the mic.
Yeah. So the
I
mic is.
was like sitting behind one of those in the debate, I think, and I moved it because I had no idea it was a camera. Like, what is this weird thing?
You just have a camera and just focus on us judging the whole time. We can upload the HOC facts and write a thing about it in a steady way, judge is judge, and see how many kids watch the
Okay.
Thinking about taking it down.
We can make this small.
Now writing
And like
the
that.
paper.
Yeah. Tap drops are ridiculous. I agree with Dave. Sometimes he's tired. They came with all this. Ah, the chair, Professor Bricker.
Do they really make Bricker the
Yes, they said Dr. Bricker, the chair. They did.
I guess he doesn't the only one with the doctor. Usually I didn't pick all of them.
They did, Bricker. Which one you asking for? Really? Yeah.
Well, not as old as the Carrollton girls apparently think you are.
I thought, well, better than most of your Carrollton girls. Thanks for
I thought I included you on that email. They thought you were 40 and Dana was 27 or something.
Wow. Yeah. Carter's like 18.
Yeah. Carter would be just like perpetually like the best looking 25-year-old.
It's like, he'll be 90 and still just be so good looking.
Who's the fit?
Huh?
I didn't even know how good.
Felt total new, but I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Remember when you judged Kansas in the double
If it, yeah, we'll make that one. Okay, that's
No, I
fair.
don't remember. Which Kansas team was this?
No.
That's reasonable.
Versus Bosu.
I don't care how I do remember actually. I wish I didn't play video games instead of listening to work. They won, didn't they?
No. Well, Kansas won, yeah.
Yeah.
Despite your best efforts.
Did you say it?
Yeah, he always says.
I think I sat with Nick Miller, which makes it even worse.
Seeing how rounds to sell.
Oh, yeah. Here we go. It's a dirty panel.
My kids just texted me, LOL, I can hear you. He's apparently watching the stream. Ricardo just turned that on very recently.
I did not sign the consent form for that.
I wonder if they're in here speaking.
Sorry.
Too short, isn't it? Both those things.
You're gonna film something that's being put on YouTube?
Although, to be fair, I'm sure that tech looks a lot more sophisticated than that horrible camera.
Okay, yes.
Bricker and Scotty P, do you want to be on the email chain?
No, thanks.
No, thanks.
Can you put Adrian Rivera on it too? Thank you.
Hey, that's what all the scouts are doing. They just like walk over and be like, email chain me, and like walk out. Thanks 2 hours.
I was.
Mine's partial troll. She was like, I love getting the, or she was like, Ed, so I'm trying to do it. She's like, I want to be on this. They just always throw me on, so I was judging. Her whole way to see it. I just like,
Ironically, the only screenshots I really care about seeing are MSUs, and that's just because I know they don't want anyone to see them. So I feel like every time I'm looking, I'm just like,
Just make-
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I really like that.
it makes me feel so impressive.
You should.
I had no clue. First few were but just the only side thing I noticed.
You want me to just go steal some?
Oh, okay.
I don't think this one is not.
Like, you remember Ricky? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, no, no, no.
Sorry.
I am. I guess.
So Top was like, I want to hear cookies, and when he was like, well, which one? And she's like, this among us. No, I don't.
Phil, do you want to be on the email chain? Do you want to be on the email chain?
Yeah. Are we all five here?
Yes. So, and yes to email chain?
Yes.
Okay.
Here, Ricardo, will you stand?
Probably.
Can you stand?
Like, you could have one of these.
Thank you. Lisa, will you work? Somebody just grab a pen, I guess, and get the email.
Yeah.
First card is pointed towards 17. The mic only really picks up stuff right in front of it. It's like a card pattern.
Well,
It's turned that way,
neighbors
we'll
was
get
watching
that
and
one.
already messaged me.
So we
Like,
should
what
like
you're saying.
behave ourselves.
Okay. I can mute it too, doing like all the time stuff.
Just when
Hang on.
Scott's talking.
Can you just like bleed?
Yeah, you take them off. One.
You should do some water. This is
No,
not
no, I have one.
Oh, okay.
I have. Yeah, it could have been so much worse. I just got that all over me.
How are you?
I should put the lid on that.
Just.
No, you're right.
Oh.
I have a t-shirt on. Okay. Is anyone not ready now?
Still not ready.
Okay.
I know you are. I apologize.
Oh, no, it's no problem.
I don't apologize.
Mario, we're still waiting for you.
We're waiting on me, aren't we?
I wasn't ready either. Now we're waiting on you.
I'm now ready.
Okay.
Do you see what just pulled up?
Nope.
This thing. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you're good. Sorry.
Oh, that's you. Fuck you.
The United States Federal Commission to limit the President's war powers authority to assert or half the United States immunity from judicial review by establishing a cause of action allowing civil suits brought against the United States for those unlawfully injured by target killing operations, their heirs, or their next of friends and security, cleared legal proceedings. Advantage one's drone norms, global drone acquisitions, and will demonstrate U.S. compliance with strict legal limits is key to delegitimize abusive practices. Also, love because the United States reviews disproportionate shaping the global regime rules and smart since the use of target killings is appropriate heavily infused emerging norms of policy and target killings to combat the United States monopoly was soon to come in for countries without attack many or seen drones that shoot missiles. The United States is often paid an open legal regime to avoid precedents that restricting its own freedom of action. It seems to assume that states will not acquire or rely upon justification for the United States might not need to rely on drones and norms to legitimize the behavior of the states using drones. It must be proven to contribute to a regime of strict limits and circumstances the United States believes is acting within the rules and needs to provide the evidence. Incredible external oversight key leads to international modeling and gives U.S. leverage to prevent overuse. Bashir 12, the administration is establishing presence of the nations with fellow countries for no reason believe the United States carries out CK's response without credible oversight and possession of the government. The go standard might result in denunciation programs would bring all of the United States job oversight denunciation but carry more weight. So the U.S. pressure to adopt similar system just as suspicion grows from countries refusing to grant such governments to turn down invitation to apply proven oversight to drone campaign will reveal discord from anti concerns is now its key in norm saying is real Wibbly 13, while advocates argue other countries don't like to follow presence powers and about fighting on establishing norms. America has the power after World War II to defend norms of human rights and form adversaries norms, have said presence of appropriate war fighting WDs, norms advocates with sincere and intended consequences and restricted use the U.S. may miss an opportunity to entrench international norms. Unrestricted drone use causes nuclear miscalc between great powers. Boil 13, consequences spread of drones, death, and constant under instability. International systems will be rapidly shift civilian great powers driven by deterrence over competition rare because they assume escalation signal are willing to engage in drone flights. Drone states deploy drones to attack and resolve on consequences pro misinterpreted as attack to uses by on nuclear program view through strong drones by railroad term relationship between nuclear powers maximize the risk of spiral of conflict. Advance 2 is primitive warfare. The Bush doctrine failed to legitimize primitive war but planted the seeds for future shifts in norms eroding. The imminent requirement for use of force causes rapid global proliferation war. Reinhold 12. Bush was neither able to legitimize the duty to defend nor convince our states the duty constitute change to norms duty to defend could have the perspective selling strength WDs and system government clear prohibition force which only allows nearly super like exceptions to limits unmanageable in a world in which no such rules exist. Each day allocates the right to decide upon the exceptions to limits unmanageable. This leads states to include the best defense against preemptive attack as acquisition WDs and imminence is no longer valid around target Israel hacking the target India and 6 use force against Russia and China and the United States all decided by Bush has not come to law section unless proclamation of death of destruction may be future although the ISIS say not yet achieve the revision of norms government self-defense and steps usually preceding norm change have been taken. Current USTK policies are driving a global shift in strategic doctrine towards preventive self-defense results in nuclear war. Phase 13. Preventive self-defense became difficult to justify for World War II as community double norms and the pressure of war set high imposing certain standard for self-defense. There's been a genuine global growth in the norm in case of right initial opposite states where strategic doctrine towards offensive states required UAVs for preventive self-defense storm. It's casting following standards of the United States Russia declared the strategy to liberate nuclear war preventive self-defense and drones current practice tied together preventive self-defense storm and integrated practice as it changes the function of IR UAVs for reducing cost of war make preventive self-defense possible global norm. Preventive self-defense is stabilizing leading to more war. The U.S. said dangerous press continuing to strike policy right. Other states' justification do the same. Specifically, executive discretion over the legitimacy of targets will eviscerate legal restrictions on self-defense. Brooks 13. On drone 6 said the nation states will follow America's example authority to justify killing the same legal theory the United States uses. The U.S. should advance towards legal reform and frame without however protecting its abuse instead articulating norms that commonly used as handy. Every other state believes how performance is generally prohibited to use force inside another state. Some just few states and law use sources self-defense. The United States use own malleable definition to emanate the fishery situational sovereignty as potential. Destabilize the collective security regime of the U.S. executive sole arbiter what constituting and thread why should other states make identical arguments and this shift will not be limited to TKs. The use of preventive self-defense will spill over to interstate conflicts. Martin 11 may serve immediate requirements of America to legitimize killings and having extended self-defense and promise to use of element of human life to all states not be unadjusted in some tailored way to deal with fears of low wage self-defense expanded to include preventive elements so be it so expanded for all purposes not only to nuclear response to strike states and to future aggression lax and equal states will open opportunities to states to use force against others for reasons that have nothing to do with anti-terrorism. Preventive war doctrine makes global nuclear conflict inevitable. Quantum 13 adoption of anticipatory force of contemporary elements and conscious interpretation of self-defense in the world would be constant hooks and possibly serious preventive war triggered by provocation to the great increase in instability during the Cold War triggering a nuclear crash depending on interaction between liberal nervous states nukes to reduce regards factors stability to grounds for war plays involves more numerous and there's great distrust and it causes global proliferation cascades and breakdown of command and control. Correction 3. States might easily include nuclear stockpile would be the only way to deter preventive strike each decision go nuclear was set off the state for zero would be casting effects large number could go nuclear in short order to have applicable calculations they're better off without these criminal for nukes by states previously just kind of car prolif nightmare may worse by alarming lax command and control and prolif capacities and level motivations key barrel and 12 nuclear energy renaissance is increasing likely concerns over ages degree warming up which a variety of countries to consider nuclear even mass increase ability nuclear based serious inflation prolif civil capacity increase ability to develop nuclear weapons site lowering the barrier attacking spaces capability low and not distributed from energy weapons future motivations are key proliferation causes extinction prone 12 the more states in possession of nukes the greater probability there's nuclear exchange could result in human extinction before reaching mad nuclear states go through and to this pure lax nuclear second strike one of the states may believe it has instead to use first the state with the invasion might believe the first strike they saw the state with the small arsenal might feel useful impression to strike first war result in war could result in fear of surprise attack striking first in the belief that the words of the inevitable deterrence as soon as nuclear states are government rational leaders to the guarantee they'll hold in the future Russia strategy Paxton's building China generals openly talk of nuclear use leaders condition nuclear crisis force a large resolve absolute back to historical crisis and obviously on the board but many have imposed finally robust norms restricting use of force empirically prevent great power conflict fast as 9 rules of the game seem to be the crucial barrier producing peace and like operation precise variety of the states step north instances of wars produce rules result in fewer wars between nations as wars occur at a lower level irons and military disputes from 1820 1945 and negative relationship between binding norms and frequency and scope of disputes defining other norms produce disputes and simply episodes of rules prevent actors from major disputes that are not contagious do not escalate toward advantage 3's allies disputes over the legality of U.S. targeted killing practices will derail intelligence sharing with European allies outweighs disputes over surveillance work in 13 behind the scenes though it is not surveillance that produces the most complication for the interrelationship but rather drones instances such as recent killing impacts are likely to heighten the European unease. Europeans believe the majority are unlawful and maintain uneasy signs of over European intelligence may not have been used now. European moves stance on drones looks like a change made or trying to acquire drones as gives incentives as well. Clear words European knows that drones are proliferating. There's a clear European interest in restricted standards and resiliency arguments don't apply. Legal disputes in court rulings were forced allies to stop sharing intel. Rex overall cooperation Parker 12 the possibility that intel provided by European allies could be used for drones that could raise serious criminal liability issues for the Europeans. The U.S. conduct operations on the legal theory of not one of the members of NATO shares which twice in the face of international legal regime has Britain's intel services have been open on inhibitions or the terror stuff causes become an obstacle to a share European actors are not going to change ECHR deeply embedded and governments cannot skip its oversight no matter how well disposed to the U.S. America's closed hours of getting to place constraints on working with the United States NATO cannot conduct operations Elections of the two competing legal regimes. Something has to give. It may just be the alliance. Info sharing and cooperation are key to global biodefense. Hamilton 9. The successful global biosecurity must be in translating community, European and North Korea represent the largest repository of research skills and engagement make health and power resilience areas cooperation include global surveillance early warning detection plus info sharing about investigation preparedness effective EU cooperation global collaboration is key. Bioterrorism is highly likely. Simon 11 throughout history there's not been a single attack of bioweapon. Why now? Because the terrorists indicate terrorists will use weapons in your future terrorists taking advantage of info. Revolution much years highly recruit experts who work in biodefense Soviet Union low will not work about visions for severe crackdown skeptics raise weapons and not be used which stores one example side is the group has not researched enough that info revolution made terrorists and the learning factors spreads that St. Labs said tech the two lowest barriers for increased probably consequence high tech bioterrorism and introducing a new weapon. Terrorists are guaranteeing publicity with a number of conventional attacks. Terrorists will be tempted to do something different. Extinction miracle 13 a virus genetically engineered spread through the air to spread through the air will be devastating. A terrorist group could develop a virus and kill a large part of humanity given roach biologists are making discoveries of viruses in the near future. Artificial pathogens could drive the human race to extinction. It takes only a handful of individuals access to agents lethal enough to exterminate Homo sapiens will be able to anybody with a solid background in biology. Solvency the plan establishes legal norms ensures compliance with the laws of war. Half of 13 Congress authorized damage use and family individuals killed experts review with private use which legal basis for it. Victims who are remaining of judges leave to provide without fear the errors might leave a terrorist a large judgment of our society whether or not there's some sort of the feasible they must be able to examine the legal arguments and say what the laws judicial review civil action resolve the risk scope of conflict and the broad definition of imminent the increased radicalization court should be able to review whether or not the consistent constitution the law which requires the force to be consistent with the international laws of war. Cause of action creates a deters abuse and avoids legal barriers. Drawbacks don't apply. Logic 14. TK oversight is best right after that fact avoids the concerns because it's not something the government acting in laws of the consideration remove the pressure of the moment and express cause of action by Congress will clarify intent that this use to go forward in support arguments and immunity section should be for damages containing source over some immunity for meaningful turn future officers even not with damages subject forward-looking principles of liability use towards these to mature case reform for justice state state significant this is the case security case in Congress to immunize officers by something the U.S. as a defendant which removed immunity doctrines Congress required terms to a judge ensure this use to be heard expeditiously and would do regards to secrecy Congress looked at fees and the HRC's models for proceeding adversarial and secret behind the security clearly counsel with regard to the SSP which Congress should abrogate an ex post review creates a credible signal of compliance that restrains future executives. Holman 13 administration the no strikes who face court review after the possible damages would be more responsible and careful about who strikes and why if courts are paid decision cause of action that would keep it accepted honest administrations come to assure the world that our policies compliance with rule of law norms and court review solves the broad definition of imminence. Quote 11 of targeted individuals not on the field of battle applying the reason harmony of court or like the is only appropriate this is a way to prevent it from harming access it's hard the consistent with the courts consider the OPTK only was the only means to be able to prevent harm to the United States executive Jim saying individuals in the war harm zone or harm to the United States TKs may authorize such an approach is consistent with the Supreme Court approach of the Supreme Court just complying with legal requirements is enough. Court review is key to verify compliance. Paul 8 is difficult for those outside the party governments to know whether the target's legitimate target's activities which plans the quality of its states have not publicly available will be different for those outside the government's come to determination competent status. Therefore, in order to need for the sense of oversight at the same time it can make a strong case that making all the evidence targets publicly available there's also urgent need to clear about the criteria legitimate targets in which legal paradigms applies criteria look they may have been met it cannot be known for certainty. This unavoidable uncertainty points to the need for credible and independent judicial body to review evidence. There's all be clear in light of unresolved which the criteria and it should be applied and how the criteria should be interpreted. I think we are
Yeah. Okay. I want to start with some of those last pieces of evidence you read. How does letting people, your half its evidence is pretty good that letting people sue the government creates like review. Why does that necessarily mean there's more accountability in strikes?
A few things. Well, I think that half its evidence and particularly the Boddick and Coleman
Sure.
evidence say there will be more accountability.
Right,
First,
but why
few
is
things.
accountability, like,
Well,
why is it a good thing? Why does it stop strikes?
Well, a few things. First is it doesn't obviously stop all drone strikes. We believe
Okay.
it stops the strikes that trigger our advantages. If you'd
Sure.
like me to talk about each one,
No, your evidence
well-
speaks very generally to the idea, or
Well,
speaks to
so
the
the
idea that it's
specific
good to have
reasons-
accountability. My question is, why is accountability the determining factor for the
So
government?
the specific reasons first is like, for example, preventative warfare advantage. Our argument is that the reason why the United States is spreading a preventive
Sure.
self-defense norm is because of our broad definition of imminence.
Right.
Our
So it
argument
just
indicates
narrows
that
it and
the
causes
court-
them to be accountable to those ideas then. Okay.
Well,
What happens if,
I'd like to explain a little more. Our argument, though, is that the
Well,
executive would no longer be able to conduct those
I
strikes
understand that
under
you-
the broad definition of
Okay.
imminence because they would lose those suits.
sure, that makes sense.
Yes.
I guess what happens then, your Ashton evidence about, or the Alston evidence rather, about the why sort of norms are important. The whole middle section talks about sort of like, in particular, like Russia, how there's all these like structural issues, like their legislator has some bills that like deal with norms and when it's a problem. Why, I guess, is there an incentive for like domestic politicians to, I guess, adopt U.S. policies?
Well, a few things. First is Alston, Bashir, and Whibley all make a very strong claim that the United States, as the
Right.
most powerful country on earth, has a huge effect on the policies and
I
norms that
understand they
other
have
nations
effect,
feel like they need to abide by.
Yes,
More of the Bashir evidence
Sure.
indicates that the
I
plan
have a
gives us
question
the
about
moral
Bashir
credibility.
evidence, actually.
Okay.
But what was your question, Liam?
Real quick, so people can just sue the government for money, right? That's all that happens. Obama has to pay someone.
Well, the plan doesn't specify what the remedy
Well,
would
it
be. I
says
mean,
civil
generally,
suits.
generally in a
What
civil
else
suit,
is
it's
the remedy
money.
for a
Yeah,
civil suit?
generally in a civil suit, it is damages payments, so money.
Okay.
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
I guess within which piece of evidence says Obama doesn't want to pay for the strikes he wants?
Sure, a few things. First is the evidence indicates that regardless of
Which
whether or not a
evidence, sorry?
suit ever happened, all of the it's not that the money that deters them. I want to make this clear. Obviously the government has a lot of money, so it's not like losing money causes them to. That's what it is. Our argument though is having a court be able to,
Sure.
definitively say this was illegal, and it giving remedies to people is what's necessary.
Sure.
It's
I have a
not that the
different
money
question.
necessarily.
I have a different question.
Okay.
The Bashir evidence, it says the international perception of U.S. programs it says about the international perception of U.S. programs. Given that we just refused to go to talks at the UN demanded by Pakistan about the illegality of our program, why would anyone see any negotiation or precedent by us as credible?
Because the Paul evidence and actually all of the
None
solvency
of these
cards
are from
make us
2 weeks ago when we refused the talks. I'm just curious why people
Well, yeah,
give
because
anything.
that's the status quo. We think our plan, while we didn't go to those talks, our plan would send a
Is-
signal that the United
okay.
States
If
is
I- if I
abiding
can
by
send
some
that on to
norms.
some-
I guess, how do terrorists get a bioweapon?
I mean, our evidence indicates that they could research and create one themselves. They could hire
How long-
former scientists from
I guess, how do they
countries
know-
like the Soviet Union.
Your evidence says, what's, I guess, the threshold for that to happen? It just says that if that were to happen, it would be problematic. Why is there any evidence to believe that that
I don't
occurring
really
is not
understand
as
what you mean by a threshold. That Simon card is very
The
good
Simon
about in the
evidence?
future because of the spread of biotech information.
I
there are
understand once
terrorist
they have
groups
it, it's
that
bad.
want to acquire it. No, it says that they can and will. It definitely makes that claim.
Where is 5 off? Solvency. I think there's
Did you add me to that? Yeah.
Yep. Norms, allies, self-defense.
I'm gonna need another second.
Where are people going to see?
He spoke from there. We can.
You can speak from dad potentially if that weren't too tall, or we can. You can.
We
When we were in
make it
these rooms, we put together like 4 of these, and
Yeah, we can put together two in the middle, but that's obviously awkward. Like the
oh yeah, I mean whatever. If you'll,
Yeah, we'll make it work. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, once I can get to it.
I guess I need to open this still anyway.
have you already read it? It's like 7 cards.
Or
Does anyone need the order? Need the doc?
I need the case order in a second.
Are you getting an order?
Or yeah.
Yeah, I'll get I'll get
So the
5.
answer yes.
Solvency, norms, allies, self-defense.
I'm having flow. Or get my flows in order. Sorry, 5. Solvency. And what?
Norms, allies, self-defense. Alright, anybody not ready? Cool. First officer, while seconds to bar quarter capital, key to stop Democrats from pushing in that defensive war, glass 325, amid positive signs of diplomacy working across advocate for sanctions, for Peter Trump for the reserve Democratic pocket sanctions will splinter, the coalition antagonized around to make a violent conflict more likely, weapons of the administration's full court press to prevent Democrats from supporting his bond negotiations, trying to influential Democrats have agreed to postpone the vote pressure on Democrats will intensify talks move forward this round, where the must let diplomacy run course, and confidence as will be a dramatic victory, dismantling surrounding nuclear programs, the east tensions between Israel and Saudi Arabia, unprecedented overtures with Rouhani, or a test alliance will be empowered to revert back to a pre-Rouhani foreign policy dominated by isolation and aggressive nuclear program and plan, destroys Obama Lewis, and 7-way president has formal limited power perception, matter success, and list of resources belief that the Oval Office is without the ability to win under adversity can lead to disaster as the lawmakers calculate who will be winning, and education accordingly losers lose, presidential experience and decline of political capital has diminished capacity of allies receiving decreasing benefit, and publicly tying themselves to this acceleration infection by allies, and the war will go nuclear Arsenal 9. Supporting the regions under my expanded threats, the president on state actors, incomplete assumptions about internal relationship, lack of communications, framework says the system weaknesses suggest that escalation could happen as a result of miscalculations, certainly easy to remind us that quickly as the regional antagonism, UCBN, weapons could be mistakenly the nuclear term, but could keep the weapons from being used next off as the counterplan text, the executive branch should establish ex-ante transparency of targeted killing standards and procedures and restrict targeted killing to clear and convincing instances of threat determined using a quantum of information framework and declare that the U.S. will hold drone operators responsible for the actions of all the drones and retain the right to retaliate against the operator or base controlling the drone, consider the targeting of U.S. drones as tantamount to targeting U.S. piloted airplanes so that the U.S. drones will be held to such standards and ex-ante transparency procedure self-accountability over uses DASL 12. Officials carry review battlefield targeting mode without publicly articulate terms govern the access authorities enhanced transparency can minimize the error corrective information and liberty and judges incentives to imitate and increase the legitimacy. The president ought to issue transparent standards of procedure for identifying target post hoc analysis, set standards to control the get incorporated into extensions beyond the against it would mitigate the resume. Next off is the counterplan text. The United States Congress should appoint a nonpartisan independent reviewer with the authority to review classified information on the United States targeted killing program and the use of drills and counterterrorism. The reviewer should be required to have a strong background in international humanitarian law and have leadership experience in non-U.S. authority-based human rights organizations. They should be limited to a 2-year term and great authority to reveal classified information to members of Congress should the reviewer deem it in its best interest in the United States. Congress should state the best interest information include any self-defense targeted killings that occur without reference to a specific armed conflict or specific group previously authorized for targeting by the United States. And the counterplan is the perfect balance to avoid the interbreast conflict and circumvention and the terror descent as Bashir and to full transparency to morally or strategically idealist risk. The risk of revealing the government's sources and targets just make this would make it all the more difficult for the government to use non-knowledge and time transparency is enough effort to force up and civil the government to dig in its heels and watch the affairs. Slippery slope towards full transparency that might render its most potent counterterrorist weapons and useful. Congress is not the ideal government to have no political reason for styles. Like expertise of business goes with terror. Congress in the UK struggle with terrorism. Is the government has to demonstrate that citizens is not abusing its power? The answer is simply an appointed individual who has legal expertise and reputation, principle, behavior, and impartiality. The fear is not access to classified information, but is expected to get the information seeking of the government. And if you success, you can raise a red flag. The model is palatable because it enables the accountability without increasing transparency. The model has been successful throughout Australia and implemented. The use of the British model makes post litigation for target attack would also be problematic. Any post operation would be meaningless in the wake of a successful attack. Any individual will be dead. Next off is the terrorist drones key to stop Al-Shabaab. This is great. 211 American drone connected to unsuccessful strike against a high-level Al-Shabaab leader is valuable to strike field. Another strike to represent great success for American strategies against a terrorist organization. In a parent response to Al-Shabaab being objecting people to their organization. This reflects deterioration in its ability. The corrections put into effect members of the basic problems may cause backlash against Al-Shabaab. Since the U.S. forces moving in that direction, conducting counter-terrorism operations. And that's key to strikes in Somalia can contain Al-Shabaab impacts or trade terrorism and Afghan stability or African stability. Version Walls are 12. Somalia is elected for the center of the government, well serving as a state from terrorism, fights well the United States, allies of the constant threat from terrorism, Somalia, posted national security, risk piracy, trails the full commerce, the compile attacks, and Al-Shabaab's aspiration to have an impact beyond Somalia, raise question about Al-Shabaab's ability to TCD, always the Africa, the U.S. response to the threat by increasing counter-terrorism operations. 2010, the White House implemented a new partial counter-terrorism coordinator, or counter-terrorism State Department stated that the strategy of facilitating increased use of arms and drone risk weapons to deploy a level of force consonant with the specific goal of operation drone attacks or discriminate the launch against a specific target, reduce the risk of collateral damage, use intelligence to believes that as a chief considerable returns from increased use of drone strikes in Africa more escalates land cancer UK and there's a couple things the African war program is aggravated intentions combining with military intervention by commercial motives neighboring the state starts good future conflicts with the spread of weapons and mass destruction. These wars prove more dangerous than ever and treaties keys nuclear war answer 9. The rising protections will bring about dangerous confrontations of key commodities nations, divert attention from channeling frustration towards other countries, and China will assume an increasingly belligerent procedure and intense competition between the US and China is similarly resentment, triggering genocidal acts, terrorism, employing biological nuclear weapons and new war and extinction from two nuclear terrorism is 113 war involving use of Russian and also could lead to the exchange of the US and Russian forces to maintain the and capable of launching counterattack and invert nuclear weapons continue to present a substantial risk terrorist like attacks that resemble nuclear attack by exploding bomb. Let's do case first.
Yep.
Solvency. Subsequent South Version Title 11, the USMT is satisfactory when claiming the area UNCJ provides that mandatory investigation. The number of sanctions that can be deployed military defense that have to do with procedure rights, even non-military participants or national curriculum. This is just which produce an effective attorney. USMT has been approved in Congress as a remedy for civilian plaintiffs for foreclosed outside the military Congress and no legal framework which kills legitimacy. Crandall and to defend legitimacy remains unclear. This year, this short some sort of type action and avoid or just yields wholly satisfactory extension of which framework govern the drills of that idea should due process have to be applied and exposed. Ultimately, false such a portion of obligation to use official crime to reform their view only after failing to resolve the legitimacy of the use of critical due process after you vote before such a crime because failing to do so as executive act with impunity and legal void and then they'll lose the case to terms. Yes, Dorothy Bronson. Their author 9. Immunity requires dismissal of the court determines whether believe they're acting within the scope of authority legal standards of great case. The court appointed would have to defer to the executive. Some course category reject all evidence style challenges. To feel like they might review lawsuits as a political question. They view parallel. Justice Thomas' course should not be the second guess. The executive judge message who is an enigma on the norms advantage. First, the norms of solve SU 13 does not follow the US and not have to employ drugs. In the hope that it will restrain the future for others. The record shows that even when the US does not develop a particular weapon knowledge to the interest of the environment, the hostile one country should not play by self-constraining rules. They employ whatever weapons they want to obtain future further interest. Once there is such battlefield technology, the rule of norms is limited. Additionally, no causal link to US policy and others. This is Anderson and 11 the methodology looks at the US leaders then and other to follow the certainty we are creating this is claiming that the arms race is over the drugs as a consequence of the US changing rules about there are a number of reasons US created or could have stopped the UAVs will have many roles because it is cheaper, safer, more reliable, and safe. And you say they feel so like developing this will have many this was happening anyway. The tech was already available to use it has large armies. It's just a fantasy way to use opening Pandora's box is not a credible initiative. Technology weaponizing is not difficult to use and spark confidence would occur with any other stage. Just so no drone war seeing 12. The doomsday scenario results from an excessive focus on evolving technology, illustrated weapon, no behavior, nations will confront principles of terrorism to decide to let target killing drone change. The risk of retaliation and requiring saying to dramatically increases protection and acquiring justice states whose use could threaten the use security of democratic ramifications to lowers the casualties. Those use are relevant experience with drones as embarrassing weapons and the global landscape. The real warfare remains fundamentally all in our condition. Drone proliferation will be slow and not destabilizing Josh Einstein. 13 debate. Actually, not gonna read that card. Allies. E1 backlash on drones. This is European 12. Your public opinion certainly poses consequences of universal predictions about the drone tactics of fried. Would prove to be what's going to have far gone on the list. If European governments not have the great position, European governments continue to see about the more continue to quantum many European officials are inclined to give up on credit. This makes European less inclined to go public. And NSA still thumbs at Schmitz. About 129 translated relations have deteriorated as a result of NSA spying scandal. Japan's already winning against expectations. Hope for formal agreement have been very unleashed. The spying scandal is expected to be one of the important issues. Just so you know, impact EU relations. Leonard 12. The Western alliance has never loomed from Washington. There's no single public through the transatlantic prison is no longer 6 parts of the European president. Never cared Berlin was never refused to engage with Barrow. Over the other side to be held. The last together making a model. What was like war precluded the relations with the Europe when the fundamental divergence of the Europeans put them into becoming a part of European powers and to defuse and be much of a help on issues. The best way to safeguard into the corrupt multiple world Europeans over institutions is the threat to that market that and the worst case scenario bioweapons will cause extinction of 12. The bacterial devices are useful as weapons. Their history proves to reform modern biowarfare. Hence the tube in 1979 anthrax has killed 100 people. Second fatalist also fought anthrax so the government run out 5 deaths because it's 105 deaths entirely. Permutations weaponized officially sanctioned future bioweapons as terrorist groups. People like 12 strikes or Oregon included this as salmon bars with salmonella. Nobody died, Roger died. Additionally, the notion, where's my mouse? The notion that they can just easily get them is a misconception. This Oregon normally 13 or 8 misconceptions lies beneath the automated testing process that previously requires skilled personnel to utilize have become like causing to produce the same output as specific input whoever their users empirical evidence cover shows that this view is completely erroneous. Yes, firstly, all new technologies not simple for work through that. Resulting in de-skilling effective science technologies rather than their kits and not black boxes expansion woven by suggestion. And their description of bio-terrorism as easy is what enables in the first place you should prefer dissuasion. This is Oregon normally 13. The weapons are easy to table. The rest of the belief that their development of apparent hair bears, although some experts point out the difficulties they know let's see the advances by technology rapidly. Below the technological threshold, the polarization that Arab is of these bioweapons development has really accelerated. But global advantage by emphasizing the absence of barriers to entry policy and also to deliver mission is more tempting than dissuasive. All kind of stupid had indicated the group's interest of biological weapons have been peak American reports exaggerating the simplicity of bioweapons development will produce the opposite. Expected to act on motivating them to preserve now the self-defense advantage forces doesn't just find modeling. They would be limited to escalate and forcing self-defense provides critical and necessary means without also authorized responsibility use of force against the bombers of threatening group. Additionally, non-unique self-defense as a ship has sailed Rifkin 4. States are frequently voting anti-territorial self-defense. States no longer can use it regard the charge rules as finding. Use of force rules have been widely regulated. Described the 2/3 of the members have fought 299 understand conflicts to the crisis where the France, Berlin, and Israel launched operations against each of us. We consulted the Britain and France, the clash was the threat of the world's economy, therefore adequate to justify action. This was a very broad formulation, self-defense, and defining postal threat to British or French categories. Additionally, multiple law causes to non-classes more than 13. The harm has been made apparent in the recent relations used to force in the cold practice test 3 ramifications. One legal subject, not only has the U.S. cause harm to the authority of North itself, when the institution decided to force upon the executing explicit objection to the UN. Security Council, the Iraq, and the Libya, this is all gravely weaken the system. Just proliferation did not cause war. This temperament and not a growing body feature suggests that nuclear weapons make it safer. There's never been a war between two states that possess the most states rational and country will self-divide. Only most certainly can give it a one-sided simple price that triple leaders make the wrong game. Game and understanding nuclear weapons change by making the cost obvious. The iron logic of assurances compelling domestic examples. Any packs in their hands weapons and ability by just proliferation will be slow. Hyman's 12 slow pace bombing suggests the right to still have rolling charge of bombs survive and once the proliferation is spreading out resistance on nuclear projects and their success. The Informal has gone in slow motion. The FT can be a long conference probably. Go back to politics. Impact is Israel strikes also lose or watch my shoot the most dangerous provisions suggesting we resist one part to be sufficient to cause Israel and Israel's self-defense the EU should provide the military support that could enable harmless code taxes right use and where the measure would kill any group by operating bombs to situation such that causes global ruin me and that Israel strike with like dark consequently regional war.
I'll send you okay. Ready? Status of counterplans.
Status quo is always the logical option.
Have you read a link to the drone DA that says the strikes the act prevents are the ones that are key to solve Al-Shabaab? One in C.
I mean, we will argue that if the affirmative stops any strikes, then that messes with our ability to combat Al-Shabaab.
So it sounds like no, you have not read any cards about the specific strikes. I understand you'll argue that. Let's talk about the quantum of information framework for the first counterplan that you read. What card do you read that quantum of information framework is more restrictive than the status quo? Because it's actually not. It actually expands the instances in which the exec can strike. So what card do you think says
You're talking about the first counterplan?
Yeah, first counterplan.
And what is your question about it?
You say that the executive is only allowed to strike unless there's a clear and convincing instance of a threat determined using a quantum of information framework. That factually is actually a broader category of when the executive use strikes in the status quo.
Yeah.
Why does that not mean your counterplay makes every single advantage worse? You legally allow the executive to strike more people.
There are a bunch of processes the president has to go through. One of them is yes, includes things that is not included in the status quo, but it also restricts other aspects.
What card do you think says that?
The Daskal evidence says that when you combine the two, because there's more than one plank to this counterplan, that is sufficient to address the affirmative advantages.
Okay.
Because the transparency is provided, that's sufficient, even if there are more strikes Obama can.
Okay, I want to talk about the second plank of it. It has the executive branch declare that the U.S. will hold drone operators responsible for the actions of their drones. So is that if they order the drone operator to do something and they strike, does that mean they get in trouble or something?
No, right.
What do you mean by that?
So if there were a manned aircraft, with a pilot in it, and that person did something, we already have a doctrine in place for how we would interpret that from other countries.
Which of
doctrine is now applied to
the
unmanned
affirmatives impacts is about drone operators going rogue? Because every single one is about
No,
like the
yeah,
strike
yeah,
that
yeah.
Obama tells them to do. So I'm wondering, what impact do you think you resolve? 'Cause
The impact of anyone developing drones, like no one's going to go to war.
oh,
with
okay,
them.
okay.
Like,
I
oil
guess I
stuff,
clarify. So when you say
that-
drone operators, you mean other countries. You don't mean like domestic, like the.
No, it's both. It's we say, yo, China, if we strike you with a drone, you should pretend that we just struck you with a jet. And
Okay.
China, if you strike us with a drone,
but,
we will
but
treat
as,
that
as I
strike
just
with a
said,
jet.
none of the 1AC's things are about our drone operators going rogue. But
No, it's it
different
resolves the
capital-
through a different
The same.
argument.
yeah.
They're deterred. to
What?
randomly
Okay, I want
use
to talk
things.
about the next counterplan, the independent, nonpartisan independent reviewer. It's just one person, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about then the internal link into, status quo solves, solvency. Where's this card about Bivens? Well, this card's about Bivens suits that U.S. citizens can have. It's not about drones. Why is it about the app?
Well, it says
Why does
that
it apply?
generally.
It says that Bivens suits
There's-
exist. That is true. They do not exist for people who have been struck by drones.
Well, they do if they're a U.S. citizen. I'm pretty sure.
If they're U.S. citizen, okay, but you will admit that it doesn't apply to non-citizens?
I don't think this episode is talking about non-citizens.
Great.
Starting.
I don't know what U.S. citizens other than Milwaukee. Okay. Other than Milwaukee. Sorry, do you want me to do your last words? You have Mr. Stitch here. I'm just gonna review it, right? Okay.
Should I read? This doesn't answer anything that you're going to be doing correct. I guess only if you're just on my time. Okay, I'm not gonna do that. Yeah, it depends. I'm just saying I'm not gonna like put it in now.
Gluten free?
I haven't read, don't know about this app.
We need to make like a meme of that.
So, sorry, I just want to clarify that
Yeah.
second plank about holding drone operators accountable. That's both U.S. drone operators
like my status. Okay. Okay.
Good old Ashley Blue.
Ashley Luke.
She's great. She's great. Brooker's like, yeah, I know her. I love her. Solvency, norms, allies, prevented war.
Hold on. Say it one more time.
Choose my favorite.
Solvency, norms, allies, prevented war. The ex-ante counterplan.
The first one.
Yeah, the first counterplan, the ex-ante counterplan. The second counterplan, the independent reviewer counterplan. The Iran dissad, and then the Flex dissad.
Oh, I should probably open this one. After all that. Sorry, everybody.
That's not good.
Anyone not ready? There's false evidence about drones, about military bib and suits in general case are being dismissed, obviously no cause of action, a Hershey Wall, the ACBC Darvers and Watch Company towards the force of White House arrest, TK3 Super Government Direction, the case Julio walks upon the United States Obama, Congress of the United States secrets now, now it also takes out the terror dissent as well, because it says that litigation is an yes, there is a legal framework, just unique as car for us, the plan brings that line that's relying on his only court action can, which is this has all the counterplans, they won't lose the case, the act overcomes the dismissal and state the original careful procedure, the Slatic and the piece of evidence I ran about now the norms they managed, they saw this car is about self-restraint, which is the dissent to the counterplans and not the app. External verification proves the United States is applying its model. There is a causal link or sheer evidence indicates that the United States is perceived as a first mover, or really evidence indicates especially key in the context of address other countries. We're going to call out the United States. The United States cannot use leverage. Drone wars is not an argument. It has to surveillance, undermines internal relations, independently goes nuclear. Are the allies advantage? EU is backlashing now. Their evidence is too old. Doesn't assume the current fact that the EU is shifting towards drone policy and imposing its own restrictions. NSA, there's no impact. AP 12 level Washington DC, the analysis from Libya, NH, hurting miracles, while the analysis made American like the new last game, according to the CFR interactions with China before relation with intelligence service engagements in their activities. EU relations now responsive about intel cooperation decreasing now because of legal crackdowns. Only the plan can solve. It's the only way to create a framework for bioterror cooperation. It causes extinction. Their only cites past example. Simon said we can't expect the future because tech is getting better. Black box arguments answered by Simon. Tech is getting easier. Rogues are getting smarter too. Their dissuasion argument doesn't assume you recruit and they can't. We don't know what they are, so we can't. They won't back down. The preventative war advantage there is modeling. U.S. is collapsing. Definition evidence that's causing other countries to follow suit. Prevents U.S. leverage. It's not. It is unique. Now as key Reinhold says, the Bush doctrine is about to be cemented unless we change it. This has the countries are recently changed their justification doctrines. The all-cause evidence of uniqueness for us. The act brings the U.S. in line with the law and solves the warrants for evidence conceded. Nuclear war, Nebula, status quo. That's our colonialist evidence. Prevented war makes all conflict. And Nebula, Perla, D doesn't assume prevented war. States scramble for nuclear weapons, so don't establish command and control. Have a unique incentive to use them because they're scared of prevented war. Also answers Perla, slow doesn't assume capability. Nebula, countries have to quantities question of motive. The only plan solves causes extinction, causes multipolar symmetries. Their evidence doesn't count for. Turns Iran independently doesn't. So nowadays key Yemen, Mani, and 12 are named the A company, the grace of the kind of the Russian or fair positive favor A company, the events of families, restored no company, maybe used to house people restored here, seeking rights to apply see for the primitive evidence sports claim purpose identify more responsibly clauses global instability, shepherd, low the controlling capacity, aid and disrupt this with the worldwide satisfied link with the war tries to recover economic destruction one which can be one with the Yemen called over the ground against with that A company controlling Yemen would be holding on to the flow of nation massively I never where the kind of person situation would get ugly. It turns the Iran dissent later and called the each of the is where I read results are war against unfortunately the facility play around to prevent by the permanent balance every even law that undermines with the air should be the race to the can use supports of activity hacker box can't see personally too much of worse than defense no the is running down your religious was just by campus the occurrence is helping defense program to their threat and pulling root as the bodily from your dress with it creating clear sense to evaluate for self-defense framework with what is regularly to World War III conditionality reject them makes the status quo and removes the status quo as a logical option destroys 3C decision making makes that often impossible because it contradictions the ex-any counterplan any counterplan doesn't solve there's no independent impact to our drone operators that's not our argument it's less restricted than the status quo this is awkward corners both high quantum program reasonable from individual crime to quantum promise they're convinced yeah this problem proved reasonable that reasonable to be falling short illustrates this causes circumvention doesn't solve imminence or I law links to all of the dissents as well Latin 14 hardly the 8th of the government hardly excellent from each of you can do that RBG the correct side will also have the use force before excellent ruby and able answer with the distance with the use force authority excellent the universe provided the the elements of air and remote before operation actually now something means comported with the law now only Congress can create a cause of action Western 12
Sorry, they didn't try and do that.
yeah. Okay. Well, Exo's not durable. Cross administration linked to losers lose Caldwell. idea of the accepting recommend undone as easily or down the sugar bottom between the causes present the action making look with the more goes on less of the yes get anything done it causes circumvention right first of all the large not work the laws of the present word secret the present total the public in the impractical president spent the finally one on TK excellent the correct the present to modify the word carve out an exemption now and now the counterplan either links or doesn't solve so doesn't clarify key legal question nothing 10 more current regarding the debate from the plot together the ambiguity of the rest of the areas in which can include who can be killed where obviously she would like to left crucial legal questions on answer like evidence of obviously costing up to the reminding not apply an accident ever be told women there's no emphasis here not civilian harm and provide redress now the
terms.
yeah good call permutation do both permutation do the counterplan as the mechanism of doing the plan now the independent reviewer counterplan permutation do both permutation do the counterplan reviewer gets ignored courts or POs and this from the American the Southern March to the law to the law the this practice of the British Power legal policy court force guarantees it links to both the decisive results in a decrease in authority and also links to politics because it will be viewed as a loss of two politicized cuts of effectiveness spouse and 13 important review strength and down the even to reduce the course having the opening mobile comes the executive board but choose to the independent review section H will become politicized tell Mark left to the independent catalyst or like circuit around absurd tries it's too much for one person but guaranteed to the review part of the stop to give the group as the more review to the original world that any fees fresh ideas of warriors to the function of reviewer continuing increase fails at info gathering Blackburn 13 the reviewers no more info gathering process like rules but the fully reviewed part of I must with the government sort of the government how some right time terrorism laws progress at slow pace ineffective oversight but guaranteed 12 principles by the debate from possibly reviewer no guidance officer will have to purchase personality review effective review the system that brings meaningful oversight the after whether critical of the UK's anti-terrorism law only courts are able to resolve legality which one needs a war dissad and permanent war dissad is are all dissads to the counterplan now the
Both counterplans.
both counterplans as well now the Iran dissad there's no impact on Iran proliferation it's all posturing doesn't escalate conflict 13 the use of something for this with arsenal Iran no to same person the force of the capacity to criminal action Iran has to take the stop down to there is something never we get to Iran to the left spread will work right person who wants to work because Iran to relation to the words one that Israel retaliate outside like ability to all to achieve strategic victory market victory no strikes Alison 13 Israel United States of all somebody Israel going to make a large cross after one watch Iran cross to the next absolute plan on clearly red line Israel for the announcers less than Israel wanting her ladder but no more effective no capital independent 320 no bomb to the lots of sugar ability present credibility bomb not just somebody see the collapse of 5 minutes of false super politically application PC now real Jew 13 not something to the person window which ridiculously mentioned the armed Western self template assumes the official change of these are the rest of the threats for releasing from members of Congress are independent releases of the island if the members of Congress likely being is not intrinsic a logical policymaker could do both the opt-out decision making fiat solve something plan pass without backlash sorry can you grab NSA Obama will fight the plan Munoz by 20 Obama or Gary California given Congress by the aim of her level post any written Trump and contributed push not the person we spent a lot of PC on this the plan is by part however 13 Obama yeah, I don't want to say that. It's not by part, scratch that. Talk failure, level PC, not T10 or 14, nuclear process, post-mortem financial countries, the piece of the community with the modern non-compliance benefits, continued further applies with no Iranian non-compliance with the GPA, Hezbollah, in Thompson National Journal, 328 Republican Acts, the cost supporting Hezbollah getting the laws, the Christian capitalist, the right to stand Obama, HUDB, the NSA, WFI, Obama can't stand the first support of the government passing Hezbollah sanctions, it'll fail because of Russia, after 319. Christ, the making of the possible Russian making of healthy merchant children, policy Russian empire requires have been crucial. My rate of getting negotiating, market negotiating.
I think overall was a link. That Tobin card.
Okay. It overall is a link. Tobin 319. Supporters have changed in hail. Whatever is no system with the letter last of the formidable coalition we had to see the right proxy of the president wonderful tax rate. We say that the exercise effectively said there was opposite combined credit president through the democracy forever. The political language that Congress was passing through the defense of Obama would be safely for the end of an important fight. NSA, Bowman 3.5, Obama for plan NSA, don't wait for me to make this surprising. Well, the accident of president or related powers will be no matter what they say. The Lewis one, the accident has one, he had every year of Obama's policy given some of his power. The next is sad. It also dumps. Now the next is sad. There's no impact after a war. Including the United States, the little after the French, helpful French offshore powers with the EU. Local scrutiny of China, Russia, India, Latin capability charge. China, India, Russia have heard of the reasons to the infantry forces to give us to the long range deployments. Global trade, it's inevitable level to the abilities. More than the country reaches the total export ability of how factors will lower the cost of bilateral agreements. More than 100 have been initiated. Plans helps kick out saying 13 no massive countries will strike the bush. Regulate determination. Strikes are posed by allies in the local public. The strike report to support host her neighbors to not cooperate. The French TV, the shuttle use stage to have the Ethiopia given determined. Use by the EU schedule to launch anti-Somali actions. The shooting out use for the legitimate concern. The ICC
flex one's good. Or whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
You good? So I guess to clarify, why does Obama care about losing cases?
Why does Obama care about? I guess could you give me more context for that?
Like, if he does a strike that he's not allowed to do and he gets sued, why does he have an incentive to not do that?
Right. I mean, for example, like he doesn't want to be, ruled against in terms of saying you did something illegal. This was not in line with international law, and you don't have the authority to do
Which
this.
piece of evidence says that Obama cares about that?
Well, our 1AC evidence, the entirety of the 1AC evidence says that.
Can you find me a line in
regardless-
any car that says Obama?
In the 1AC, we
In the
read
1AC, the 2AC?
An
That
administration
says
that knows strikes could face court review after the fact with possible damages would be more responsible and careful about who it strikes and why. If Congress would create a statutory cause of action, that would keep the executive honest into administrations to come. It would reassure the world that our policies are compliant with rule of law norms. That was the shortest solvency card, so I can read the long one.
What's the side on that?
That's Holman 13.
Hophead says that even
Yeah.
the threat of sanctioning and saying that this is illegal deters and moderates the president psychologically.
Fed says that it just puts us in the direction of liability. So I
mean that is
I guess
one
more-
part of
really
the
read the
card.
part.
Yes.
So what do people need to do to win the cases?
What do people need to do to win the cases? Prove that the United States or the exec initiated targeted killing that was not in line with,
I
laws
guess
of
my
war
reading
that
of
would
the
include
Quoka card is it
proportionality.
says that
evidence.
a court would likely find the use of a targeted killing is only necessary and appropriate if it is the only way to prevent someone from harming the U.S.
Right.
So basically, all someone has to do is demonstrate the U.S. had
No.
any other
Oh,
mechanism.
To be clear about that, Goria card talks about imminence. It also, like the Hobbits card says, it has to be in compliance with the ONF and the laws of war, which their requirements of the laws of war are things like imminence,
hold on.
proportionality.
So one of your solvency cards that is the only one that sets a standard is not the standard.
That's not
I
true.
just don't understand what you're asking. Like this is one part of the imminent standard, which is a part of what is ruled on in terms of these cases.
There's proportionality is another part of the laws of war. There's
I mean, there are a
discrimination.
bunch of other standards it has to meet, but I'm asking.
Vladeck says all of
standard?
those. Vladeck says all of those. The Goria card that you read describes one of them.
Okay, that's so. Okay, how does a war start according to the Boyle scenario?
How does a war start according to the Boyle scenario?
Yeah.
In our norms advantage, it says that without norms on the use of drones, countries will use them in ways, for example, surveillance drones that
So they'll use
undermine
it. Okay.
security and that
And just to
undermines
clarify,
the
what is
confidence
it?
in
What
nuclear
activities
deterrence.
are we pursuing that is making the EU angry? Which drone strikes?
Oh, our Dworkin evidence is very good on how the EHCR and NATO, there's international courts that are cracking down on the European Union for cooperating with the
Which
United
strikes
States.
make them angry?
Which strikes? I mean, it doesn't talk about it specifically. United States policy in the status quo uses strikes without
I mean, we still use
external
strikes post
verification.
plans. So I'm trying to figure out what's
Right.
the distinction between the strikes we use post
The
plan and the
illegal
ones that
ones,
make
the
EU
ones that
angry.
violate the laws of war that we just described.
So if it violates the law of war, that's what makes it EU angry.
I think you misunderstand. Our Dworkin evidence indicates the EU is using drones increasingly, also is imposing external constraints on drones, wants the United States to fall in line with this policy for cooperation because it wants to have a consistent framework to work
They
with
want
the
us to
United
model
States.
European drone policies.
They want us to fall in line in terms of following international law with an external accountability mechanism.
Yeah, can you do that?
Yep.
And can you
Oh.
Have you gotten any text messages yet?
Oh, I should check
Yeah,
that.
you should try.
Because
I
that's
bet
the
you've gotten
most
a lot.
salient issue.
Oh.
Inquiring
I'm
minds need
intrigued.
to know.
Yeah.
/ I want to know what everyone has said so far.
Yeah, what are you all's favorite fruits?
What's the leader?
I mean, we're actually conducting a very scientific study.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. Before the end of doubles, we need the answer.
Oh, we need to know what is the favorite fruit.
Alright, are you ready for this?
That's what he's laughing at.
Alright, people's favorite fruits are round starts at 5:45. Congrats. And
You made jokes about
That's
it.
We need to know about.
Do you know if it?
I replied all. It says your message has been sent. So.
I don't know yet.
I might just be having some.
Can I borrow it? Still?
Oh, of course, of course. Oh, is it? Oh, yes.
Here, pass over.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Are you not on Facebook yet?
Let's do this.
Are you on Facebook?
No.
I didn't think so. Yeah.
but there's so many memes that are circulating on Facebook.
Yeah, like my
Can you hold this
sole
for a
reason
second,
for not
please?
being on Facebook was so
Yeah.
I wouldn't get
Hold
tagged
this
in
for a second,
ridiculous
please.
pictures of me doing maybe things I shouldn't be doing a long
That's
time
fair.
ago. And for some reason, pictures are like around the internet.
But they're not actually doing things that you shouldn't be doing a long time ago.
Okay. Good enough.
Like it's trying to act for Facebook.
Thanks for the clarification.
He did get that already, wasn't it?
That was interesting.
Thank you. Okay. The order will be the ex ante counterplan, the reviewer counterplan, the terrorism dissent, the advantages in the order of the self-defense, self-defensive wars, norms, solvency, and then allies.
Can I get the counterplan order again?
Yeah, ex ante reviewer.
So one more time, the whole thing. Ex-ante,
Uh-huh. Reviewer, terrorism dissent, and then case in the order of the preventative wars, norms, and then allies.
You said norm solvency, so the first time you said norm solvency.
Oh, I'm sorry, I lied. It was yeah,
Wait.
I'm a liar. The preventative norms, preventative defense, norms, solvency, allies.
Wait. So it's preventative war,
Yep.
norms,
Yep,
solvency, then
allies.
allies.
Yeah.
there we go.
Got it.
Yeah. I think I had some wires crossed. So everybody good? I might have to dispute honeybee though. Okay. Has to be true. Okay. Will consider permutation just as competition conditionality the one another with conditionality the one another no extra authing to first the written independent review counterplan first sufficiency is the frame to which you provide a counterplan interpretation because that is the standard for what their evidence says there's counterplan their evidence says that review and accommodation will be sufficient to solve the F. That's also all of the cross sections even if the statutes are in place. It's just a question how people perceive it's credible. First, the permutation above the counterplan is mutually exclusive. Congress power to create independent review who keeps the information internal assures outward credibility after tries to create transparent norms which also includes the executive limits flexibility police and distance also congressional review and consultation alone solve the F is too much information for court 13. Congress must contribute to the dialogue because I do not believe in congressional oversight simply review specific targeting decision proposing any types of oversight required congressional endorsement of Congress to allow the executive to continue to plan to execute but also be periodically reviewed. Next, arguments the permutation to the counterplan this is competitive because it's not a true test of opportunity cost. The plan is also not it also doesn't involve the ability to test the idea of the link to reheads. It's not a question of germane. This next uses the counterplan will be ignore how the counterplan solves best sufficient software is better rounds like independently more credible but 12. The U.S. has appeared appointed an intermediary who was looking for or reject the officials counterplans within the government's intelligence, also in the debate that need to choose between inconsistent after-effect estimate and interview, also the area to keep a sound alarm, also in the whether not the strategic justification of keeping the agreement counting under wraps only. A government certified moral obligation to agree to such arrangement and enables a public check with the president to read the review or go to the press. This is your solvency author Bashir 12. The system would also address the public's concern to any media report not to be also use to the public because they feel healthy, not leave their option over to the response with the target action, merited no action. All the counterplan also solves Jerome Perloff because it provides the use level to denounce others part without requiring information or leak. She says that she says it links to politics over the she says it. Also, the second, that's why this is there. The second path of the counterplan also is so independently solves your self-defense advantage. Your author concedes at Martin 11 because in order to satisfy necessity proportionality, use some sort of information for the use of reliance on self-defense is a justification for the key policy of the evidence of all the attacks and not consent with self-defense and also the adjust unless the administration offers more justification on use of time violence, prohibition, use of armed force, and more important harm to continue practice. It also causes you adjust because of the relation between adjust and HIIHR will be regime. The next argument that it links to policy of the counterplan is calculated ambiguity, and we still don't know how the operational mechanism overreaches the check, which we still have operational flexibility. That also means there's enough flexibility. It doesn't link to policies while Journal 12 because the agency council could have drawn the line of regularly detailed criteria. Officials have leaving ambiguous and also helps with the official avoid providing information militants could use to engage in targeting. She says that it's politicized over there, and this evidence is the best evidence in the Tweezy. It gets Bashir indicts Bashir on the basis that the review fails from the required reviewer rubber stamps, which is only indicative of the affirmative. Also, the counterplan its professional checks and requirements for selection ensures the reviewer will bring norms out of the international law into U.S. decisions, even if they don't do it effectively. The mere perception of their intent solves the ass signal, even if there's no incentive to rubber stamp. The 2-year term limit means there's no incentive to keep the job based on performance. So the action review is subject to these issues. Also, there's only risk the absence of politicized work. Judicial review allows the executive flexibility when information gets released. Only the review can play compared to the better role getting info outcome ensures no operation fail. Also, your author concludes the counterplan is still the best option. Fast 12. Still, the idea of the new structure both appealing the warrants and independent review on all the questions around the accountability from such rights in the central program will be classified. She says review fails McGeary. I was talking about the Australian reviewer says they didn't have a large enough staff. The counterplan text also concludes that despite this issue, his first report would run an A grade, which means it's sufficient to solve the F. She says the reviewer fails because the reviewer fails because the black barn evidence about it's about issues that the UK reviewer and the counterplan specifically addresses. Says he doesn't have info gathering powers. The counterplan grants the ability to both the gather and the review means even if there's no binding power, the U.S. reviewer always have assurance authorization to leak information if the administration resists. Also concedes the reviewer in Australia if the UK were to follow the model would solve all of these issues. Means your evidence concludes negative. Also, she says there's no guidelines, which means it fails with the second piece. McGeary ends with the cult of personalities doesn't apply to the U.S., which is the only warrant in this evidence is specifically about the UK system appointing people from the House of Lords. A true problem because it's a false reform because the ask process of sifting through the release info has transparency, no oversight, which is the distinction. Second, that we have impact turned oversight. They leave it to the executive discretion to release information, which they'll stack into that in favor only the counterplan pushes oversight providing the correct balance of transparency. No offense here means it's only a risk the counterplan is sufficient to solve the internal terrorism dissent. First is that there are two impacts that are going to outweigh each other case. Even if we access the same impacts, there's a question who controls the internal magnitude. She says no impact after war. You can describe that. Evidence indicates there's not a propensity in this text. Or evidence indicates that things in regional ability indicates there's great active draw in, which means instability and conflict escalating power. Look 7. Africa is a dangerous and strategically valuable place. Small wars can easily escalate big wars. Local conflicts, little aspects of all of these conflicts of the interaction helps control shipping lanes can give rise to global confrontation with regional competing actors and global powers of conflict. And Africa have the global and regional dimension. Second is that we must keep Al-Shabaab specifically in the run. The alternative is financing them through conflict, which kills the African elephant cost and coaster 12. Al-Shabaab's access and also contribute to the ability to pay soldiers because the Ivory Research is one of the lifetimes that Al-Shabaab needs to maintain super young children, most of which are not radically motivated maintaining army units of the U.S. $1,500 as much, but also average trade also a big chunk because the role of Al-Shabaab and the Ivory Tract is one of the immense concern to harsh environment which they operate because Ivory to that much more sufficient because the West continues to fight radical terrorist organizations by seizing access to these organizations, including Al-Shabaab rely increased on tracking the Al-Shabaab tracking the conflict. Ivory signs a bit like sounds alarm about because the source to take offense to Al-Shabaab to continue financing more 38,000 elephants were killed each after to an average of 140 chips because elephant population is over because the also percentage image into content and class 22 years old consequence goals be disaster. It needs to be more assault on Al-Shabaab because the ability to operate because most of the country need to be disrupted. Al-Shabaab needs to be kept constantly on the run. The next argument is that cost exchange because AWF 2 should be careful elephants spot that they are keystone feast and should make this very dramatic just the keystone feast without the elements of grassland SEC should the elephants are required to maintain the species without the elephants it is purchasing 30% of the species disappear trickle loss of development species from the connection rolling to unraveling the dominant effect elements are key to maintaining the balance they have to the long term struggle other programs out ways and turns because there's no impact there's no defense because next he said that trade is never means there's no snare for things that great but very power worthy from the only snare for things or the only snare for extinction things that grow trade's getting drawn which means that Iran and impact is still isolated the only way to access great power in the context is that she says the kick out argument first you conceded we are winning the war on terror we are winning the war on terror because the status quo strikes we always default to maintaining the status quo and strikes question because there's no way that you can see the med controlling you need to send the second argument she makes is that the government is that they're going to be kicked out but the government won't take out the backlash with 13 because this you has no current spend the 3 branches of government course and executive both taken the opposite of the Congress pass a broad authorization Congress reaffirmation the EU contains no limitations that accept that among the branches of the government reject their view of the landscape by courtesy everyone who matters supports drones and won't mention critical mass with their team because any president is going to feel obligated to maintain counterterrorism on the outside of Congress and play the way they'll go. Along with it, they will set manifest political avenue for reality for every reason because it's not the point to allow Americans to only for killing terrorists overseas, allowing them wiggle room next. Argument she makes that the act is able to solve link over X host requirements kill effect and disperse the plan can change to the chain of command which collapses the targeting program Planer 12 because the act they're barring such acts acceptable national security policy better view that law because it damages the books of policy interest in dissuading military officials acting unlawfully illegal analysis not correct considerable support for denigrating the starting point of our assumption to the president constitutional as well as a policy reason to military officials from the Supreme Court allowed for strong policy to interest not having military officials with the process of litigation failed to act to the national interest case that diverse security council was a view that's supported by decades of president strong national security concerns while the point is popular the faculty launches as for opportunity to seek against military officers to determine the effects of the additional great certainty cost of the chain command confidentiality operational factors are higher spread whenever the officers found liable and diminishes the position of commanders back for operations to leader 12 because of danger of obstructing U.S. national foreign policy spectre practically creating infrared intelligence challenge and targeting a few more cases of the danger of obstructing U.S. national security policy. This is one because claims indicate the effectiveness of the military because allowing a superpower leader to get official target will find the face of the president also be very difficult to have more effective better claim for the allowed the enemy sealed order to reduce the call in account because the legal defense of allow such would diminish our commanders with that means also with aiming to George creating a remedy the context of strike will so force the men to have the same greater measure the outcome of the military also gives you inhibit the ability of armed forces to act as hesitation because if you such hesitation real time active as board decision making of military officers profound implication of military effectiveness. This also creates a chilling effect of collapses. Actually, no, I don't want to read that card. They also, and the next evidence is that they're able to, allies are able to solve the impact of sentences too old in the Constitution. That's important. That would be held in the case debate. Self-defense. The first argument is that nuclear war is, she said that nuclear war is not you considered a couple arguments here. Are we ready piece of your Vladic indicate there's not a model for people to be able to find the stats which are necessary for the plan effect or have to be long time for the things like up to accept that the Russian evidence indicates that self-sufficiency is already out. There's already no ability for them to be able to model there or to create a model in the stats which people already have their own ideas and more. It's also in support of the Guinness evidence indicates the U.S. is not perceived as a model. It's negatively proven by things like the UN credibility talks. The last argument to make sure that they're able to solve things like Yemen, but the said is a better interlink for or is better interlink to solve this impact. You do not mean to need this goes negative hindsight 29 because is how kind of Yemen becoming more dangerous scope of the military elements immediately about kind of Paris position as senior official many said the people definitely because it was in 2000 law she is even afraid of going outside because he was al-Zahari is a union use of the trans reveal risk of trying to pressure dismissed because again the gains were short because the reason pushed by the health use to take back control of the data that ACAP is achieved little because of hit and really effective are part of the last option of group with the limited capabilities market capabilities and next argument she makes that the pro defense versus that the temperament evidence is better than she's giving credit for. She says it doesn't assume capability however your evidence doesn't assume it just indicates in case the reward of proliferation it means a bad thing however our temperament evidence indicates empirical there has been incentive to do it and if there was to be too slow the Hyman's evidence doesn't turn the Iran to step because either there's only a risk that we triggering the stats force negotiations around the table next is the norms advantage first that there is no way that people are going to model norms. This is also the one you cross our Axiom Anderson evidence indicates the nations can't pursue weapons because of will pursue weapons because of self-interest and because not because norms of international use the act can't change the perception your whole one is the or Allison evidence indicates that Russia has structural incentives not being to do with us so things like in the legislature you are not able to impact and change with the EU as president's rebel. It's also proven that the recent drone talks with the US refused to even go to talks about Pakistan means there's no internal link also is there's no impact of things like drone where the sitting evidence indicates there's no escalation as people have no incentive of using only risk of using drones to prevent them to escalate convention means there's only a risk of the status quo effect of the affirmative solvency flow first that there's status she says it takes out the terrorism test that the status quo solves the app takes out the terrorism test there's sufficiency test here because either it takes out there's not a link to the terrorism test and the app would also treat link or the status quo solve the entirety of the affirmative either presumption or argument to vote negative also doesn't take out the terrorism test because it's distinct about the types of cases it indicates we're still able to do things like targeting in the status quo whereas those would take out things like the absent the crandall evidence also gets on a formal legal logic is displayed on the other flows also the Murphy evidence indicates that they'll lose the case which from the affirmative their author also concludes that the world in the US were to lose the case that we networked for things like credibility because there's no ability for the US to actually look like they have implemented a valid policy that anyone takes seriously. You're gonna have to take that NSA number, sorry.
What do you think the link to your terrorism dissent is? Since you didn't read really a link in the 1 and C, and all of your 2 and C evidence is in the context of Bivens, which is not.
I disagree. I think that, and I'll scroll back up really quick to make sure I tell you the right card. I think the second piece of link evidence in the 2 and C talks specifically about giving people a right to sue.
Right. I mean, in the context of Bivens, right?
No, I think the distinction is that it says, in the context, it diminishes the chain of command because giving someone who has the ability, or was struck at, the ability to sort of get money back or to have a suit makes the operational commanders look very bad, which is bad for sort of military operations.
Which is, okay.
Bad for our drone program because they're no longer able to do it.
Allowing a suit against officials, which is not the plan.
No, the distinction is that allowing suits against officials means our military capability and ability to enforce our drone strikes is diminished.
Can I ask a quick clarification question? Clarification question about the comp plan you extended. Does the reviewer review the strike ex ante or ex post?
I want to check the counterplan text really quick because I don't remember what I said initially. The reviewer get the information, I think ex ante, but let me double check.
We say because this will
okay,
affect a lot.
so
that's fair. I just want to make sure the counterplan text is exactly what I thought it was. Yeah, they'll get the information ex ante, but they can't release the information or do anything about it unless the strike is not a legitimate strike or there's a strong reason to believe the executive.
But after the strike happens before, like, can
They get the information before, but they can't like act on it unless it's a non-valid strike.
But if it's not valid, they can act on it before it happens?
No, they can't act if it's not. They can't act unless it's invalid. If it's invalid, they can leak the information to the media and they can leak it to Congress.
Before the strike has happened or after?
Either. Like they can leak it ahead of time and be like, you can't do this. This is not okay.
Okay.
Or they can choose
Okay.
to wait till after. It just depends on the situation.
Okay, so PRISM and NSA scandal, right? Obama appointed, in quote-unquote independent reviewers. Obviously, the public criticizes this a lot. Why do you think the counterplan will be perceived as distinct from that? Obama just, kind of dropped the ball when he, kind of got exposed as not appointing independent reviewers. Why do you think the public will be like, oh, independent reviewer number 375, this will be different?
That's a very specific number. I think the distinction is our evidence. Well, two things. First is your Bashir evidence indicates in the context of drones it would be uniquely credible because the lack of information being, about the public, that just a lack of information the public knows about the issue. The second
Do you
reason.
think the public is well informed on PRISM and NSA?
I think they're more well informed on those issues. They're at least
What-
more often. The
that
second one is that your
distinction seems
Bashir
very
evidence.
silly.
Your Bashir evidence also indicates in the context of at least the mandates of the counterplan to have certain requirements for do they have humanitarian experience and those kinds of things. People would necessarily care more because that adds credibility to their position.
Oh, right. It's like your experience in humanitarian law. That's obviously qualified to talk about. Okay, that's fine. But
Sure.
we can establish the UK has failed, right? What do you think is different about the
Right.
UK
The
model?
counterplan well, we don't do the UK model. We say UK model is a basis, and then we make sure that they have strong background and requirements. We make sure they have a
They're
staff that they're
smarter.
able to use. The counterplan text says that they get 2-year terms, which solves the sort of House of Lords cult of personality problem, and they also get access to the information, which is distinct.
Okay.
You're correct. The UK model alone is bad. The counterplan is the UK model plus additional claims.
Allies, the first counterplan.
Sorry, I'm writing your own. Here you go.
And politics.
Sorry, it was allies. What was the top?
Allies, first counterplan, politics.
Remember the one in C order, which one is first?
The not independent reviewer counterplan. I also forget what we called it.
The ex-ante counterplans.
Yeah.
That makes sense though, because people say that
Sorry. It was allies, counterplan, politics.
Yep.
Scott would have this.
Oh no, sorry, I just hadn't breathed.
MP's just a shit show.
How did I just get coffee?
He just got coffee in his eye. Oh, God.
Alright. Anybody not ready?
Hold on, I'm not ready for it now.
I don't think anyone's.
That was a disapproving look.
Oh my god.
Just so no one freaks out, the first cards are from the 2NC talk. So.
Okay, good.
Alright, anybody not ready? It's mostly for record. Wow. Okay. NSA scandal is destroying relations at the Schmidt Center on Security Quality isn't enough. It definitely collapses relations. Oh, this is better in the long term. Scenario 224. The challenge was on the NSA. Put a measure in the trust relationship because spill over the Christian attention. For a longer view, serious discussion, the following series collapse of transatlantic. Corporations likely possible now. The Bio-terrorism may they have conceded to functionally and internally to predicate off of their representations. A couple of theory issues. First, they have to be responsible for their narrative because the policy analysis and narrative is what determines whether or not people want to pursue biological weapons. They've also conceded framing issue that it's a question of dissuasion, which is the overall. Currently, if sometimes it causes zero policy failure, this is more evidence. Order William 13, the current dominant narratives, policies do not contribute to the Korean law strong areas to violence development. Aggressive record response would be leading to the current policies if it did achieve positive results. These policies follow the martial like environmental development, but love and this evidence proves that they cannot get access to it even if there is a black box. They are still not how to use it because they still have to understand science now. The counterplan first conditionality, counterplan we get two counterplans that are contradictory rules. It's also all their offense are it's negative flexibility. It's the only equalizer on incredibly applied topic sense education, ideological flexibility, ability to 147 to defend from two sides, third logic, rational policy maker wins things with the counterplans task was actually a better option. Fourth is research credentiality, limit to encourage negative research about strategies down the defense permutations check to blip your answer you don't get to advocate them just because you're red conditionality, because no insurance really fast, therefore reject the argument. Not the team argument responsibility is bad, it's only a chance it causes documents with no offense. The offense conditional in the first place is that they didn't specify their agent, which is bad because it denies counterplan ground, no politics. First is the decent not wasting trust case. First, we are on time for the nature of the internal league is one based on objection of the deal failure and being passed by the access. The truth is faster, just like no impact defense pressure for escalation will be intense at short term and around this column 12 they are around face. Travel centers, they both sides will come and significant pressure to fighting. Since they would limit to reception charge, they might quite allow response back calling for balance if they use to recommand controls could push the attempt to right launch any missile any possible the IRCG. Reach the process of authorized response, they can rapidly expand the fight as soon as you use cash irresistible political pressure pass for US approach, but motivate around to let you more dangerous tax risk Russia may not do to take, and your war defense is all saying ultimately like more likely to be dangerous to volatile in the future for the past decades of regional orders prevail now. The US appears to be willing to exercise influence about the leaders regarding the on the Turkey side or increasingly bold or within a check off and never let risk this decreases the breaks and have deteriorate. Now there will be around strikes in Australia. It has the motive of Menendez will lowers the threshold to Greenland taxes. Leonard in 13 Senate resolution. Greenland is really attacked the resolution despite Menendez can do it. Use tactics for the potential is really attacked. They can have destabilization in the region. Not body resolution is strong. Resolutions don't directly apply policy language manifest in the legislative efforts. While the discourse resolution bills seem for the hawkish push against the these resolutions impact the Israel. Internal policy frame the shift the US land around the capacity language. This is low threshold for now. There is definitely definitively capital forces. Political capital is sufficient. The short term arguments is only let's talk about the bill. This is capital 2-2. The push for the sanctions has solid Democrats who want to bottom our back panel with still money possibly be sent away. There's the full flow. The president for now has foreign policy vision. Obama started reaching out to Congress and skepticism raised. They're ongoing trying to give concerns citizens an alternative. The administration now has the space available for the president gone all in and question every shit and apply every possibility pressure point out before issues specific needs. Their evidence just says that he doesn't have as much political capital as he could have, which means it's sufficient to solve down the they say PC not real. However, the GP will exploit and lost independently to flip Democrats on vote regardless of PC does Rogan 2-5. The Republican senators joined to make a recall vote on the floor sanctions bill. The Republican Congress is planning to use very trade to push read expand the Republicans plan to put pressure on Democrats who may be on the fence. GP senators are planning to get the chief running Senator Democrats calling the fence. Democrats would have run more than 59 votes in the Congress. The Democrats bill was more than pushing. The vote count passed to be approved to super majority. Additionally, vote switching is possible based on Obama's perceptual standing. This is Crusher 13. This puts Democrats in an awkward position. They stand with the president. There's a disagreement between the vast majority of the that's why Obama diminished forces are deterring reform from the administration. Sources of banking committee to hold but if Obama standing committees to drop because President Democrats going on the way recruit the politics states theory is research the team kills the politics is the only way to incentivize current events and research and education. It also justifies doing it to every December's making it possible to negative this means it can't go for conditionality. Obama will fight the plan. This initial like non-influence in the legislative process may account for the judgment enforcement and security. The president can influence legislators, especially those who belong to his party and proposals would have meaningful enforcement would provoke resistance. Additionally, limits on war powers authority definitely splits the Democrats is huge. In 13, the left wing of the party will also target Obama for Obama champion the Bush practice St. Louis and whether Democratic lobbies to challenge Obama with the signature to Democrats one of the president's key domestic issues and don't want to run his political capital market. Political competition Iran is a war powers issue means that Obama the plan will trade off. This is Marion 14. Obama is prepared to debate the US lobby. US supporters are major reason for the legislature. Rouhani is under pressure for hardliners to be in the deal. Letters will put the hardliners back in control. Legislature will commit the US to military action if Israel military is a competition between Obama and Israel. Lobby comes down to the war and peace. The initiative is to end Israel war or make this additionally the plan. Additionally, like the long charge case, this is Lottery Klein 14. The president will use whatever tools are disposal to be capable of furthering political fusions using data capital and improve the children environmental influence of the president to use force abroad because foreign policy is successful for the president political capital. We expect president to order drone strikes and increasingly frequently president facing declines of both not only state by risk exchange deterioration is her political capital mark. Political capital means that drone strikes are more inevitable. He was circumvent, and if he loses political capital now, the talks failure or inevitable forces means you default to maintaining political capital. Negotiations will be tough. This is Pillar 217. The opposition to reaching an agreement says even though the opposition is temporary defeat, much contrary about the Senate that their starting negotiation will come from the people who want negotiation to fail will enthusiastically highlight anything that can be used as an argument to win talks. Additionally, in the statistical, there's at least a perception that the talks are going to succeed, which also impact in the short term. Now, the sanctions that is out of context indicates that Obama was pushing threatening to veto an old bill and then starts talking about the Hezbollah sanctions. There's just unique for this end because they're using lower sanctions now on just Hezbollah, whereas if Obama looks bad, then they will revert to pushing for worse sanctions. Obama which is the link story. Now, Russia will not miss negotiations for 3 reasons. But only 325, 3 important factors suggested it may be possible to pursue cooperation in the nuclear file, even if Washington wants to survive Crimea. Russia shares the mechanisms preventing the Iranian nuclear alternative or negative for Moscow. Blocking the negotiating process with Russia's opportunity to assert South Russia my relationship to Iran is too modest to survive the sanctions. Russia's been direct beneficiary of the sanctions and having Iran's exports. Additionally, the unions doesn't outweigh the link. First is no longer veto proof. Recent letter proves Johnson 324 is 10% letter indicating support for the negotiation. They warning South Republican deception. The both common communications indicate Obama's not having veto proof majority back the sanctions will second as Republicans. This is Oman Tribute 324. Republicans that are starting to fight bill that would impose new sanctions to fight Obama since Republicans want to include sanctions on the packages of the member. Additionally, GOP will flip Democrats as working to pretty sure I read the card already. NSA thumper, or NSA is the opposite of thumper. Congress is flying all over themselves to point out how much they agree with Obama. This is legal 325. The Congress supports Obama's proposition to ND, and NSA's mandated the race to the bandwagons begun as clearly how the administration agrees. It's a turning point with the administration. Well, it's great to see additionally no vote for 3 months. This is Adobe, UP 327. The administration was reinforced in the current system. Back to the NSA from those 90 days, suggesting that there will be an appropriate window of time for lawmakers to act. Additionally, here's another card on Russia won't mess with negotiations. Gladstone 321. Political analysis was not told because Russia shows Western concerns that they want to issue itself. I think it's London trying to destroy the 10 seconds Russia wants to deal, nor neither one its backyard with Iran nuclear bombs, just itself. Yep.
We have 6, I believe, exactly. Yeah, well, really quickly first. That is. So, I'm not. Oh, yeah. the preemption advantage. How those end up there? The preemption advantage, the norms advantage, for preemptive war, sorry. Norms advantage, allies advantage, solvency. That's all. We just need a case. Then the counterplan they kicked, quantum exec, then the independent reviewer counterplan, then the drones DA, and the Iran sanctions DA. Gotta love it whenever you piece of paper is 1 AR.
And where's solvency again?
Solvency is at the bottom of case before the counterplan they kicked. And just also to help everyone who has docs, the cards listed under case number 2 and 3 are meant for the counterplan. So,
Okay.
well, not always. And go really fast. So sorry if I'm going clear. You clear?
I'm ready whenever.
Ready? Preemption outweighs the entirety of their distance because your columnist 7 or columnist 7 indicates a mob. Preemption means every single conflict. As case calls for about nuclear, this columnist 7 also outweighs their impact in terms of distance. They're flawed again. This is not responsive because it does not say no. This is not specific to our norm of modeling. That's the entirety point. There is not a model of what imminence means, which means people can justify means anything that is our first Reinhold and Martin Evans indicates other countries are modeling our broad definition of imminence indicates we are creating a new Bush doctrine that will be solidified globally. Or this is more specific. Yes, effective proliferation. Your temporary does not assume a world of preemption, which means that things like deterrence don't happen. Also, our culture indicates that there will be wildfire proliferation or chronic evidence indicates that means that things like second strike capability are not created, which means they're used or lose pressure. They also can see the Slagram indicates it turns the Iran to set because the only reason Israel could preempt Iran with nuclear weapons is when there's a preemption model of norms advantage. We're not going for it all. Their norms modeling cards do not apply to the other range because they're only about how we use drones, not about self-defense doctrine, which we have very specific evidence that other countries model the United States, how the Allies advantage it. It's not a relation scenario. It's about courts legally ordering that they cannot share intelligence, which means the NSA doesn't matter. What matters more is drones. Also, the NSA doesn't take out our torque, and the AFP evidence comparative indicates the drones are a strong control. Now there's no link turn reps don't matter. Balls like 5 threats to not a manipulation because human life promise on language not because reality of change. Perception of it is not used so purely credible whole way we say we're helping determine its essence market. And as they also don't have an alternatives, which means they're just describing how people approach bioterrorism as task, but they also can see the plan to be able to solve for it because they solve for intel now. Yes, bioterrorism calls the extinction. They have an extended causing impact defense or miracle and Simon Evans indicates the terrorists are developing new weapons right now. Only snare for extinction. They don't have a card that nuclear weapons cause extinction, which means it's tried for the affirmative. They can always recover from the distant impacts. Not solvency. The status quo does not solve. You can see our Hirsch evidence indicates the cases are being dismissed right now. There's not a cause of action for drones. They don't lose the case. The Murphy evidence says that the case will be dismissed because of things like state secrets, etc. Vladik evidence indicates a cause of action solves that's in the one. See, I'm the quantum counterplan first is ace packets in the voting issue. There's no social basis for it. Agent counterplays are bad. They're inflated requests and not a voting issue. You can see our Vladik evidence indicates that ex-ante cannot possibly determine legality or imminence, and it can only be done by a court, which is a solvency deficit to the other counterplay. Now the independent reviewer counterplay, they concede it links to both net benefits versus politics because it still has Congress imposed Obama and he was still fighting, which means it's still lost, and it links to drones because they haven't read any specific links insofar as it solves the case. Would also link it's a yes or question. That means permutation both solves it doesn't solve the case first. Is only a court can resolve legal questions about imminence, which is our piece of law. And all the solvency evidence, which means that you cannot cause other countries to model it. Also, it's also credibility arms. More specifically, this question only external oversight from a court is able to solve. That's our home and Paul Evans. People think that Congress is incredible. Also, this will be context of the independent reviewer because our Val 7 city case will be politicized, particularly true in the context of PRISM. People won't trust it. Lose 822. The review of the servants Obama promise will be independent outside panels that can consistent watching insiders close eyes to the scary assumption of the advocates that the lack of review, lack credibility, and like any controversy to make up the plan backfire. The goal is credible her not being achieved in congressional view is not credible page. In 313 finds that the defendant of the CIA people have been heard the defendant against the committee chairman over 3 years. The House and Senate have often been accused of being too close and not pursuing oversight of the model stages. The captures have to go out of Congress. Also, it is not perceived as credibly international, which is a conceded argument. Also, one person is able to do it now. Huge framing issue. The complaint text just says review, but does not say that they can rule on the legality or even stop the strikes, which means I don't think they really change what happens with our strikes. We didn't read the author that you think concludes the other way. There, Martin Evans just says that we need to expose what our definitions of imminence are. The complaint does not change those definitions. Only the court can, which means if anything, it makes their impacts more likely. Now go to the drones. They said there's no Africa conflict. Your click card is so unqualified. Our cloth evidence says way better. Global powers don't care about Africa, which means when it asks, there's no impact to elephants. Sake of 97, elimination creatures not affect humans 1 out of humans can survive. If 9 develop creatures with 60% of the functional progress functional body fewer even. If the members or organisms becoming sick market extinct, that means our impacts out weirds now you drop kick out is inevitable. She only read domestic cards or Zenko syndicates without norms. Other countries will kick our drones, which means we'll not be able to use them that turns our impact. Now our KBI evidence is specific to expos. It does not solve decision making because they are still allowed to execute the strike. In the world in which it happens, it's only afterwards it causes them allows them to rule legality, which means it doesn't stop if there was actually a big terrorist attack. Also, we substitute the federal government for individuals, so we don't link to your dissat. Flanagan 13, the damages won't depend on who is actually a fault. The West will access the federal office. Seconds go to the deployment of the federal government. That's we are not going to figure out what the guys are. They don't have a specific call this question or Al Holtzman. Since also conceded indicates that allies intelligence is critical in trying to solving for all forms of terrorism, which means it's tried for the firm to only we can solve their impact now. The Iran sanctions we all wait because only bioterrorism causes extinction. That it's not fast. Even if the bill happens immediately, they don't have a fast turn to the time frame. It does not turn the case. There's no analysis for those or Alice analysis is much better. In the case, Israel has always postured and always changed their red lines, but empirically when Iran violates it, they don't do it. Also, our couple evidence indicates Iran would be rational with its nuclear weapons. They want to attack one another only if there's a wildfire preemptive norm would be able to happen. Now PCs low now. Our independent evidence indicates that healthcare is already sapped political capital, and that disproves the thesis of their DA if he was able to still able to pass it afterwards because there was so huge controversy after it. Now losers lose think it's going to lose them this debate because you have conceded the NSA powder of Walden evidence indicates Obama's pushing for it right now, and it's causing controversy, which 9 needs to controversy link. And also 9 needs losers lose. UN 14 Obama may rise up to defend the NSA, but don't count on Obama's first instinct shift security. Also the other branches taking the intelligence question Congress summons of also reverse polarity of power scores considering press restriction on targeting database and search method of party benefits from weakening second and foreign affairs. Now the discussion to failures of our Adler evidence indicates the crisis in Ukraine means that Russia will intentionally scuttle diplomacy there. Evidence does not seem Ukraine Russia will undercut sanctions Gladstone through change by public assurances escalation of not 17 deals and Russia Ukraine of course effect talks to Iran experts Iran when these Iran Putin talking set to bar to deal with Iran Russia is going to be head with sanction buster also no impact of the Middle East club and 7 layers of interest in self-representation army army secure towards chief protection breath and protecting power and a little capability there's no present air believers commit forces to conflicts and which will not bother your country so compelling it to stop him and love and never committed forces marketing forces also they have read a non-unique to the DA their Johnson evidence explicitly says Obama no longer has a veto proof of majority and their evidence he's already been using his political capital which disproves the entirety of the thesis of the DA intrinsically as a reason to reject the argument not the team seriously they read a non-unique card that says he already does not have the votes and all their evidence he's already been using political capital which disproves the thesis of their DA. Sorry you can't answer uniqueness of the link with like a non-unique against your DA. Don't let them backtrack on that. That's the Johnson card.
We have
Sorry, how much?
548 when I started it. I started already.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, anyone here been to Indiana before?
I've driven through it.
They don't sell alcohol on Sunday.
politics dissad. And then case in the order of allies and preemption and solvency. Shift some things around here. What?
Kai chatted me and he was like, dude, you've got a big stain on your shirt. And I was like, really? Where? And he was like, oh, I was kidding. Edward told me it's wrong.
It's the stupidest thing. They're pretty good on the order though. Yeah. Okay. That's gonna trip me up somewhere. Agent counterplans reason reject the argument of the team proof because they conceded the thesis of conditionality. We need to be able to test the agent of the act as well as their mechanism for solvency. Next, the reviewer counterplan a couple of framing arguments of one of yours conceded first sufficiency should be the frames in which you evaluate the counterplan. They have read evidence indicates that things like oversight are necessary. Self-accountability. We provide a model of accountability, which is better because it's not a question of releasing the information or making sure everyone understands a model. It's the difference between actually having the U.S. as a credible model because the U.S. would not submit to such a model if it was not able to solve or were not a credible actor, which is there. But sheer evidence also second is that you should compare the counterplan to the status quo, not the affirmative feature denied. Better than the status quo to reason to vote negative on the counterplan because there's a risk of the just said second is the counterplan solves the majority of your sheer evidence indicates it's better because it indicates the reviewer gets information and verifies it and says it's okay or leaks the information, which is better because the only way a president would ever submit to such a deal if they were a credible actor in the first place means it solves all of your sufficient arguments. So either the F is not sufficient, you should vote naked about presumption because there's only a worse than the status quo, or it's a reason why you should vote to the counterplan. So there is that any reason why the counterplan doesn't solve or links to these decides reason to kick the counterplan force and the two are unjust because they concede the thesis of conditionality indicates that broad rational policymaker do the same. It's just a reason why it's a good toss of debt. First, the permutation is not able to solve it links to the politics instead because it links to the politics instead because it involves congressional because it involves congressional mandates. Also too much information up front that you cannot solve things like transparency requirements. First, that the next arguments that the courts are keep there is a risk of a court follow on later on because if the act is truly such good precedent, then you would never have to leak the information that the court could necessarily do the plan at a later point, which means there's no opportunity cost between the two. Also, people don't think, or people think the reviewer would be more credible indicated because he would submit information means there's only a reason the court would fight. He says he'll fight the plan however he won't. He'll say he'll fight it, but no, because it's empirically proven Obama will not find the context. Is he asking for an independent reviewer in the status quo? Next, he says the court is keeping the model answer that about pieces of clips like first or Faust. Having concludes negative indicates an independent reviewer that's based on the UK model with the amendments of the counterplan text to be able to solve what you should prefer. Our evidence on the question. He said Obama's just going to apply it inside our counterplan text indicates it needs to be someone outside the U.S. government who has years of humanitarian experience, but also has the necessary relevant experience. Indicates to check that some agencies are rude. Evidence just indicates it's also solved with the counterplan text. We wouldn't appoint someone from an agency means it doesn't. Able to solve. He says that people pay the counterplan, however they're able to get the resources to indicate the people are able to solve. He says one person can't do it all. That's also solved the counterplan text. He says the counterplan doesn't change the gesture, change the definition doesn't matter because it changes the conditions by which people understand it means we solve enough risk after sufficiently next to terrorism. Just we can see there's no external impact. There's not a link to specific evidence. This isn't offense for them. It isn't offense for them, and no, there's not unique offense politics. First is that a couple of framing arguments. Preemption is not a reason to vote. They have no evidence saying in the context of things like Israel and Iran care about norms. And you have conceded evidence from the article indicating the context of norms, how the U.S. generally interacts with other countries. They don't care how the U.S. does anything because they have their own self-interest at heart. Even if they're rational actors, that just proves our argument because it just means that rationally they will act in their own self-interest. Second is that bioterror is not. He conceded bioterror. Impact defense indicates there's no way. Even if the bioterror weapons are necessarily required, there's no way for the users to prefer. Impact is the only world in which they actually get the capability to buy weapons. The world of things like immediate economic. You also conceded that the negotiations are happening in the status quo, which means there's only a risk of playing, even if it doesn't overall trigger new sanctions. It provides the risk, which means that collapse of negotiation independently turns the case. You've also conceded independent reason why the link alone turns the case because you conceded you spotted the link in the two, and the one area indicates the posture view indicates the plan leads to circumvention because the bomb will fight against the bomb will only fight against the plan because of the context of negotiation because it makes it look weaker. Which means there's only a risk link the other. The next he says that Israelis empirical or that Israel strength are always posturing. However, our impact defense, our impact harsher endurance the call evidence indicates escalation posture has the short-term impact because even if they don't actually launch these strikes, which perception will not lead to miscalculation response. But even if you control the same types of impacts, the question of who controls the magnitude of calculation or escalation is always going to go negative. Second, or saying evidence quantifies it indicates that even if Iran is a rational actor, your defense is too old on the question of rational calculations. Also, there's impact to middle score that outweighs in terms of case that was all explained. That indicates there's only high regional draw. He says the political capital is low now. However, our evidence is true. And he said that should have killed the disad first. The healthcare didn't have political capital. We have enough in sector for issues specific use in our cap evidence is sufficient in the short term. Also, nobody cares about healthcare because the website works. They don't have a card. And second, you concede to prefer issues specific unique to doesn't matter. The next argument makes is the NSA is the NSA separate. However, the internal link to politics is predicated Obama's because Democrats don't want to tie themselves to unpopular president going into the midterm. The NSA doesn't treat the link for two reasons. Obama gave up his own authority. The Lewis evidence indicates Obama was losing doubts with other branches as the authority question. The NSA bill doesn't affect. And second is that the NSA bill was popular, which boosted his standing, so Democrats still want to stand with and go into midterm. And there's two links here. Because he did not always the question of vote switching with the plan cause they fight in Congress, even if it doesn't lead to a strike cause of vote switching was net. Worse because it fractures the GOP coalition. Second, the GOP will exploit the plan as a loss. Two, have conceded the plan as a loss and it's tried or die negative in the link class. And he says we linked to our own argument. This Johnson claim about uniqueness overwhelmingly link. However, they're taking the card of context. Senators basically said, oh, yo, Obama, if you don't make negotiations, we'll work and push for sanctions against you. We won't be able to veto them because they don't want him to keep extending negotiation. Like here is the constant suggestion. Johnson 324 senators expect the administration to keep conference regular price because negotiations continue to July 20th deadlines with the encouraging members have also expressed concern Obama will come back to announce the deadline has been extended. Means there's no reason to overcome the status quo. He says the Russia's Trump are going to send a letter. You can see 2% of baloney and the grassroots evidence indicates Russia has no incentive to do this because they have just as much a reason to want Iran not to be a proliferating actor in the status quo. Means they have no incentive on Iran. They're also the only risk they're going to posture. Also, doesn't collapse the deal because our evidence indicates they have no incentive to do that. You should prefer our evidence on this question to indicate they've conceded the plan is unpopular and that the plan will cause a fight in Congress. Means there's only a risk it causes what? The new Middle East war defense card was preempted by the same evidence indicates it's too old. Means there's no external impact allies. The only argument we have to answer here is the bio-terrorism weapons. Even you can see, if you've proven our argument, it's the way that the government talks about things that bioweapons indicate that they have the capability and they're able to get it indicates that shapes reality. One, your rep shape reality just proves the argument that you perceive they have the ability to do it. That's going to lead them to develop bioweapons because there's always a risk that status quo triggers your impact faster. Second, because the groundly evidence indicates that even if they get weapons, they have no knowledge of how to use and prefer our evidence post-haste takes into account new studies indicate there's no external impact to disadvantage, no way to resolve it. And second, argument is on the self-defense advantage. First, I did a lot of this work at the top of the deceptive. Even if there's not a model in the status quo, there's no inevitable impact on this question because there's indicates that other states model can cross apply the evidence from the norms advantage here because even if it is specifically the way that other countries care about it, indicates that rogue states do not care about the way the US does. There's also the way to see cross indicates there's no incentive for other countries to actually follow our norm of the question. The only way to strike a balance between things like the counterplans models are only risk the status quo should trigger. The third is the Ruxin evidence indicates that self-defense is already not a model. He says there's not a model in the status quo because people can justify anything. However, that just proves that Obama will justify anything in the context of the plan is always going to be perceived as inevitable, which is a conceded circumvention argument on the politics because Posner, Beal, and Obama is going to justify as anything once. Justified as anything once. Last is the politics system the solvency flow. I'm only going for one argument here. The Murphy evidence indicates that even if they're going to dismiss the cases here, are going to lose the cases. This is a double line for the affirmative because one thing either they're able to bring suits against the government that's perceived as something credible, in which case Obama is submitting too much character. That means he has to have a loss on politics, or it indicates they're going to lose. It's like your Murphy evidence concludes that in the world in which they lose it, they use not something credible negotiating. It means there's no internal link for you able to solve their countries.
We have how long?
I wrote it down. It was 3:49.
That's Yeah.
I appreciate the dissertation.
How many theses? What?
He's going through the, I'm just going through that.
Yeah, wherever it's best for you. Each one's on the page. Turn up the brightness.
Is Phil just standing out there? He's got something. No, is he?
He was like right behind us.
Stretch shoulder. It's pretty impressive though. Yeah. No, and then deeper that in. Harder for him to breathe. Oh, yeah. Yeah, just try to
Okay. So the counterplan, solvency, the allies' advantage, the preventive war advantage, and politics.
I actually moved that because that's first in order. Let's see. Counterplan, solvency, preventive war. What was next?
Sorry, counterplan, solvency, allies, preventive war, politics. Ready? Counterplan leads to the war. The entire case is not sufficient. It doesn't make any sense because it doesn't able to solve the framing issue. Is the United States is not perceived as credible as perception, which is unique to our war and allies. First of all, it's perceived as lackeys of the government, contextualized by our Lewis Evans' more recent case, and Obama recently appointed other quote-unquote independent reviewers in the context of prison means that other allies won't trust us. Secondly, is they won't enforce the mechanism of the counterplan. Concede across the image, the counterplan is only functionally review. The independent reviewer just shakes his or her finger at Obama, but it doesn't actually enforce it, which means that only the courts are able to solve their. And finally, the second plane of their counterplan really gets them in trouble because they can only advocate the entirety of the counterplan if it goes through Congress. The conceded page piece of evidence indicates that no one trusts Congress because it's related to the NSA, but perceived as partisan lackeys and agencies of the government too politicized, which means that no allies will perceive this as credible. Here's a framing issue, even if they're quote-unquote planks solve in actuality doesn't solve the perception, which is key. Internally, information is irrelevant. Now, the negative on perception doesn't make any sense because the counterplan isn't solvable. We're supposed to be evidence about how the courts uniquely are key because these only key to resolve evidence. If you get the counterplan for you weigh the entirety. Yeah, the counterplan.
Explain minutes more. Explain minutes more. That's a court doctrine. It has to be.
Imminence is a court doctrine. A court doctrine. The executive will rely on it and say he or she has independent, inherent authority in the Constitution, which is not something the independent reviewers have to solve, which only courts can. Now, the counterplan links to politics. The 2 hours very light here. You should not read into their evidence for them. Her sufficiency framing the counterplan proves that counterplan linking to politics. Yes, no question. They're linked for the one I see, which is about war powers restrictions, making Obama look weak, which means other people are less likely to vote for his policy. The counterplan obviously triggers because Obama is being constrained by Congress. Also, even if he is asked for the counterplan, she specifically says in the 2NR that controversies will make trigger the link which the counterplan would cause insofar as the plan does. She said that the GOP would latch onto anything, which means that it also links the Hughes card says the counterplan would cause infighting among Democrats, which should be sufficient to trigger its solvency. It's too little, too late. We didn't read Murphy the 1 and see the only warrant in the card is that of unity and lack of a cause of action consequence.
alternative.
They don't have an
describing
alternative.
status quo.
Falsely evidence indicates it doesn't describe material reality, which means it's not reason to vote negative. The preventative war advantage rogue states. We were able to crack down on them because of leverage. This is key to conceded. Internally, the other countries' monoliths. They looked at the United States first before our fiscal evidence indicates that specifically touch the Bush doctrine. This is key to entrench. This is key to entrench norms right now. We are able to solve Obama's justifications, which answers her argument. Because even if he uses broad justification of the status quo, yes, he can use whatever he wants. But the counterplan cracks down on that sense that that would be, not the counterplan. The plan cracks down on that sense that it would be unconstitutional. But sheer evidence is the kind of the external review or sophisticated evidence and his executive discretion independently leads to the war. The politics disadvantage now. They're framing issues and purest threats of how to again and give no impact. Ace point is Iran's only posturing, especially since at the negotiation table it needs to look strong for leverage. Copley says it cannot use its nuclear war fighting. Israel knows that means both of them mutually deter. Base point is Israel. They'll compromise. Allison says Israel has been threatening war since 1992. Here's a framing issue. All their evidence is rhetorically powerful. She says post-states, but there is nothing that has changed since then. They can win. A war happens, but there's no terminal impact. Cook says countries view the conflict of other countries in the Middle East as someone else's problem and don't get involved. Empirically proved by Lebanon. Also conceded micro-war. The Middle East armies are small, so they prioritize regime protection. Only means they're only use their military to defend themselves, not get drawn into conflict. Means worst case Israel, Iran fighting out conventionally, no impact. All their impact evidence goes to ask Collins say escalation happens when countries preempt because they're scared. That only happens in world preventable war. The Absol's preventative doctrine causes Israel strikes Iran, makes the impact inevitable. Even if we can't solve zero impact, it makes it inevitable. Try to affirm it's illogical to vote for that since there's slavery evidence because Israel bonds use justification.
You said like a prolif impact.
Justification. Sorry. Proliferation also. Proliferation also leads to multiple nuclear war. Multiple nuclear wars will obviously turns to dissent there. The dissent negotiations fail there. It talks about a normative claim how Russia should have an incentive, but is it not in the context of Ukraine? Russia doesn't want to look weak. It wants to look strong on the Ukraine issue, which means it will not go to the negotiating table because it just wants to see a lackey of the United States. She only says quote unquote no incentive, but doesn't have any warrant. The link doesn't turn the case specifically. They concede evidence. When I see two pieces of evidence indicates that the executive moderates the executive will be able to listen to this. Now the uniqueness argument, it should be a reason they automatically lose the politics disadvantage. You cannot respond to uniqueness over the problems of link by reading a non-unique to this. The Johnson evidence is the only card that cites vote counts and says verbatim, quote, Obama does not have a veto-proof majority, which means inevitably they'll be able to override his veto on sanctions. This is the only possible answer they have is that PC cells with their own 1&C uniqueness evidence says that Obama has been lobbying Congress about sanctions for months. The fact that he's lost his veto-proof majority proves that lobbying fails. Zero risk to the dissent because this was a negative argument. They try to re-clarify this into an R by re-highlighting the card, but the card should reach just says Obama is imploring Congress about sanctions negotiation. This doesn't disprove that Obama's already lost his majority. Sorry, just also to make something clear, there's no circumvention. We've proven that this moderates the executive, reduces his power, which means that it doesn't roll out.
And their card just says Obama would want to use more drones, but the court would say it's illegal.
Right.
And we would still solve imminence.
Even if Obama has the incentive, we defang him and remove like his justifications for this. The
Bio-terrorism only existential risk.
yeah, I said that already. Bio-terrorism is the only existential risk conceded framing issue, which means that they have to win basically 100%. We win 1%, and that's infinite lives that we save.
What are we doing?
I was getting.
Okay.
Thank you for a great